Okay, scholars. Greeks and Jews. Okay, two of the greatest thinkers, greatest thinking groups, two of the great scribal cultures. The people who produce, on one side is you have the Old Testament, New Testament, Hebrew scriptures, massive amounts of fascinating stuff. And on the other side, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then Herodotus, and then we're going to get into Thucydides and Aristotle. And it's just like, we don't have that from Egypt. We know there's lots going on all over the place, but the scribal culture somehow thrives in these two small ethnic groups, Greek and Jews, and they're an ethnos, ethnic groups, and so we're sort of dependent upon them, and they have an outsized influence in the world today. And we're going to talk about two sort of there's multiple forms of being reasonable, multiple forms of rationalism, and Jews and Greeks are definitely at the forefront of putting this together. We're going to talk about Ezra, and Ezra is a type of example of faith, and faith is Aristotle writes a lot about faith as part of logic, as part of an epistemology, a social epistemology. So we need to have that faith, and that faith especially is in documents and stories such as, how do we know Jesus rose from the dead? Well, it's by faith, because no one, we don't have any eyewitnesses there. Now you can't prove it in any other way. It's a by faith thing. But we know most things by faith, all right? And then what we're going to talk about today is at one level a Jewish monotheism of which just everything is sucked into God. And God is the creator of all. God is ineffable. God is beyond language. Language is something just sort of, it's earthly, it's ours down here. It's not in God. God is beyond even language. And so you get a tradition, and I had you read some Isaiah and stuff. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Your ways are not my ways. Story of Job is where Job, I've got questions, why are things going on the way they do? And God's answer is a non-answer. Where were you when I created the, heavens and the earth? Where were you? And so this idea of we don't know. Habakkuk is a story of a prophet who he's got a complaint, Habakkuk 2. My complaint is wow, you're sending these Assyrians at us, and they're sort of like, why? They're like radically, sure, God punishes, but don't punish it. Why punish us this much? And then basically the answer of God is sit down and be silent. The Lord is on the throne. You should be silent. We have these traditions in Isaiah and Romans of where God is a potter and we are clay, and we do not even have the right to try and, convince God that we're supposed to do something. He's supposed to do something. And so you have this very austere, absolute creator monotheism. And that has a lot of meaning for our smallness, our humility, and that our thinking is limited. Now, the other great thinkers about especially the limitations of knowledge, along with the greatness and possibilities of human knowledge, are the Greeks. Okay? So we're going to sort of look, I had you read it, we can discuss those things from the text of the Old Testament, but let me talk a little bit about this Greek tradition. Heraclitus, is considered as sort of one of the founders of this tradition. There he is. Notice he's got his pen and paper. Sadly, we don't have anything written by Heraclitus. Here he is. And but look at all these guys with their, everybody's writing, here's going. So Aristotle and Plato have their books with them and stuff like that. See, this is a celebration. This is Raphael's painting of is celebrating a type of Greek thinking, which asks, what are the causes of things? What makes things? And so this isn't like faith stuff about how do we know history in this painting. It's how do we know the connections, like A to B and then causes C type of stuff. Also, more assurance and certainty of things is sort of depicted here. And Heraclitus is the first person to talk about the logos. Okay, and let's go over to this here. The logos. Okay, and it's a sort of all-purpose word for grammar, or all sorts of for the word. It's often translated in the Bible. In the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the logos. It has to do with meaning. It has to do with a type of connecting things, especially a grammar that holds things together. Well, that's the logos. And so the first person we have to write about this logos, or we think we don't have the writings, we have people writing about him, is Heraclitus. And Heraclitus saw the logos as a type of, thing that holds the cosmos together. And the cosmos is a type of world machine. Everything's connected, everything's running, everything's united by a type of software, but in some ways it's a hardware too. But it's a software called the logos, okay? And this logos, we take it into, logic, okay? Logic is the stuff of the logos, and then you have things like biology, and you see the log in there, and ology is a study of, or an organization of, putting bios, which is life, things that are living, into categories and trying to study them and understand them. And so this is this idea of something out there that we can it's a tool. It's more than a tool. It's something we can attach ourselves to, because we're part of the logos. Our minds are part of the logos. The cosmos is part of the logos. We can actually, if we apply our minds, know more about the cosmos, the what's out there, the logos. Okay, and one of the things about this is that Heraclitus apparently, does the sort of what we, is the philosophic thing. He sits in his, lounge chair and thinks. And because he is thinking logically, his thinking will actually find truth out there. Okay? And this is a powerful idea. He lives about 500 BC, okay? And he's Greek ethnos, but he's living up there where in Turkey. A lot of these guys live in Turkey, what we call now Turkey. And so Heraclitus, he has some really fun things. He says there's a type of relativity out there. There's hot, and then there's cold. There's fast, and there's slow, and there's all this. And one of the things he posits, at least we're told he does, he sort of thinks, is that all the cosmos is moving in these relativities. And, there's a lot of truth in what he says, We know that this table is moving, and we're hurtling through space, and there's molecules inside the table, and look, he had an inkling of a great truth with thinking in terms of the cosmos being in motion. Okay, so this is this power of the mind, and in many ways is very optimistic. Very optimistic. Logic, as it works itself out into sort of a systematic form, it does a lot in confirming and giving assurance of knowledge, and even expanding knowledge. A equals B, you know this is a fact, and then you also know B equals C. So now we actually know a third thing too, which is A equals C. So you see, you can actually sort of like expand things and build proofs and stuff like that. So big confidence builder, okay? That's Heraclitus. There's another guy about the same time, Zeno, okay? And Zeno shows us this other side of Greek thinking, which is like an exploration of humility in the context of our abilities to think. If you know the stories of like Pandora's box and the stories of Daedalus and Icarus, you know, Daedalus and Icarus, right? Daedalus, one of the great inventors of all time. He's smartest man in the world at the moment. And what happens? He invents wings that his kid dies. He had actually earlier designed a maze in which he then gets in trouble because he's the only one to know how to get out of the maze. That's the maze of the Minotaur, if you remember, for Theseus' story. So, you know, Daedalus and Icarus' knowledge gets you in trouble. You know, wisdom is something different than knowledge. And then also, like, pride comes before the fall. There's a lot of... Socrates will later... Plato will say, Socrates says that all that I know is that I know nothing. It's sort of these nice conundrums. In the Bible, Paul gives us a nice one where a person from Crete says that all Cretans are liars. Well, that's a circular conundrum. It's like, what? And then he says, and this is true. And so Paul is just screwing with your brain. And he's having, but he's tapping into this Greek humility tradition, which is that, no, the mind plays tricks on us. And so Zeno is the greatest figure of this, because what Zeno does is works with a number of paradoxes. Paradox, okay? Dox is a sort of teaching, a doctrine. Para meaning like parallel. Two things that run side by side that can't both be true, but in fact seem to be true. So here's a simple one of these paradoxes. Here's point A, here's point B, okay? So you want to get from point A to point B is you shoot an arrow, right? And this all seems practical and makes good sense. But the thing is, and Heraclitus had said, you know, not that they actually talked to each other or knew of each other, but, you know, everything's in motion, so the arrow in motion will get something. Well, Zeno's using this to show, whoa, this motion idea, this thing we experience, motion, actually is illogical. It can't be true. You can't actually have motion. And so what he says is, look at this. Look, for an arrow to get from A to B, it first has to go through one half of the way, right? Everybody agrees. Well, to get to halfway, it's got to go through one half of that. To get to that half, it's got to go through one half of that. To get to that half, it's got to go through one half. And it just keeps going. And so it always has a half distance before it can do a whole distance. So it never ends up physically moving. Now, this depends upon belief in infinity. There's infinite smallness and infinite bigness. You can always add a number. You can always subtract a number. And so, or you can make a new fraction, okay? So here's the paradox. You can believe in infinity, which makes lots of logical sense that there's this infinity of numbers and things like that. Or you can believe in motion, but you cannot believe in motion and infinity at the same time. Now, calculus and all sorts of fun things are going to try and mess with this later on in history. But this is still one of the great conundrums. It's a great paradox. People get lost into this. You know, it's like Zeno is pointing out that our minds have limits. Our minds lead us into screwy directions sometimes. Our minds, in logic, you can have paradoxes. You can have things that don't work together. So Zeno's real fun that way. So Heraclitus and Zeno, another guy back in the day, back in that day is Pythagoras, right? Another 500 years BC. Pythagoras, Pythagoras comes from Italy, and then, right? Yeah, I think so. Goes traveling down to Egypt over, you know, and comes back and eventually becomes this great sort of wise man. Apparently, Pythagoras is the one who invented the term philosophy, which is, someone says, you're the wisest man in the world. You're Sophia, wisdom. And he says, no, I'm Philosophia. I'm a lover of wisdom, okay? That's the story as it comes down to it. So here again, we don't have any writings directly from Pythagoras. But you have these ideas like things work in harmonies. Things, such as the harmony of the spirit. So he has a lot of religious ideas especially. But here's something that works. This is a right angle, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This kind of thing. These are like principles. And then pi, the idea P, the idea of a number that's a constant in the universe. These are like very deep mysteries. And Pythagoras sort of saw them as deep mysteries and taught them as deep mysteries. And this sort of Neo-Pythagorean tradition is a tradition of how our minds are really cool and powerful, but mysteries exist, and there's lots of interesting things that our minds can't get a hold of. So, what I'm saying is the Greeks and the Jews, they both have very different attitudes, especially for the Greeks. Our minds are sort of connected to the cosmos through the logic, and so, like with Socratic things, you can, through introspection, we can sort of figure things out, like justice and things like that. Whereas in the Jewish tradition, no, knowledge is really in God, and our knowledge is always substandard to that. So it's not that just living makes us tied into the truth. But on the other hand, both of them do have a humility tradition. Both of them do have a tradition that our minds are powerful and good. So this is what comes down to us. This is why we're at a Christian college, is ultimately a type of Christian-Greek agreement that somehow there's a power to the mind, a usefulness to the mind, a real amazing quality of that our minds connect to reality. And then on the other hand, there's this deep humility that, wow, hey, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. Our ways are not necessarily God's ways.